Good evening, everyone. Oh, excuse me. Must clear my throat. Good evening, everyone. It's Tracy Cromwell, your integrative nutrition health coach and personal trainer here tonight. It's Tough Love Tuesday. And tonight I have an amazing guest with me. I have Dr. Kelly Kessler with me. And Kessler, I can't read.
No worries.
The screen is so small. So, yes, I'm still on my iPhone, everyone. I'm still working on the Macintosh challenge. But anyway, I'm really excited to have Dr. Kelly here. Before I go into her bio, I just want to thank everyone who is watching, who watches live on Facebook tonight, and also replay, everyone on YouTube, and all those that end up listening to the podcast when it's posted up to most all podcast platforms. We are recording live. That means what goes, goes. Sometimes there's tech challenges. Sometimes there's a cat. There's some kind of thing that happens. But we're all good with that, right? Right.
Absolutely.
Try to be as real as we can.
That's okay.
Right. Yes. So again, Dr. Kelly, thanks for being here. So tonight we're going to be talking about something that I can't wait to learn more about. And it's to help us understand the relationship between eating disorders and chronic pain. And I want to think I kind of get it, but I can't wait to hear really how this whole thing works. And then also how we can heal through what's called neuroplasticity. So I'm sure, Dr. Kelly, you're going to tell us what that means. So Dr. Kelly is a licensed physical therapist, wellness coach, host of the podcast Rewiring Health, and the owner of Optimal You Health and Wellness, LLC. So Kelly teaches women who have a history of an eating disorder how to regulate their nervous system, which I can't wait to learn about this, to achieve relief from chronic pain through her signature method, Eating Disorder Pain Solutions. So you inspired this work from your own journey, right?
I did.
I've talked enough. So Dr. Kelly, please just fill us in about you and your work, and I'm all ears.
Yeah. So kind of going off of my own personal journey, I did struggle with an eating disorder for several years, from my late teens to about mid-20s. The nature of my eating disorder was that I would initially, I would restrict eating, and then I would just exercise excessively, and then I would restrict so much that I would end up binging on a lot of food, and then exercise even more excessively. And I did that for several years. And I honestly didn't even believe I had a problem at the time because I was an athlete. So I'm like, no, I'm just working hard. I'm just bettering myself. I'm constantly on the go and ready to level up. And that's how I kind of viewed it. I'm just pushing myself to the next level to get to my goal of being an athlete, even better athlete. And that's kind of how it was. I just kept that cycle going for several years. And then I had a lot of transitions in my life at that time. So that definitely contributed to what I was dealing with. And I, again, would exercise so excessively to get the calories out of my body that it got to a point where I couldn't rely on exercise alone. I mean, I was waking up in the morning, going for a run, eating breakfast, going for a run, eating lunch, going for a run, or going to the gym, dinner, gym. And then while everyone was going out to the bars in college, I was out running on campus. So that was my daily routine. So, I mean, I look back on it, I'm like, how the heck did I even do that? But there was such a driving factor in me, and to everyone else, I was an athlete. So they're like, wow, she's so dedicated. I actually got a lot of praise for it. But inside, I knew why I was doing it. I was dealing with a lot of emotional things, and that was kind of my coping mechanism. And I didn't recognize that at the time, but now looking back, I'm like, yeah, that's what I was doing. So it got so out of control that I couldn't deal with it alone, with just exercise alone, that I started actually vomiting. And that's when I came to realization that there's something more going on here. And so, even though I recognized I had a problem, I didn't want to stop because the eating disorder was a place of comfort for me. So I was very secretive about it. Really, I only one person knew about it, one of my close friends, and that was it. So I did not disclose this to anyone because I didn't want somebody to tell me to stop. This was like my only place where I felt like comfortable. So I did not want anyone to tell me that I needed to stop or slow down or anything. Like it's the last thing I wanted to hear. So again, it just continued on like this for years. And then kind of got to the point where I felt like I kind of had that like pivotal moment. It's not like I had it and everything got great, but kind of had a really, really low point in my journey where I had eaten excessively. I had vomited multiple times. I had run and I was just like sitting on my floor, like shaking. My heart was pounding out of my chest. And I'm like, if I continue down this path and I keep doing this, like, I don't, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, I was just like fearful for like my life at that point because I felt
Mhm.
like I was just down such a bad path. And I feel like that was kind of like in my head, I'm like, I have to do something. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I don't want to live like this anymore. And I feel like from that point on, I stopped digging myself a hole and I started just kind of clawing out of it one step at a time, very, very small steps at a time. But I eventually worked my way into a place where I was in a better place. And again, like I was saying, that's not a linear journey. There were many setbacks. It's not a
Yeah.
perfect journey. There were times I felt like I was doing great. There were times I'm like, what are you doing? A lot of like shame, guilt, so many emotions and all that. And so I finally got to a place in like my mid 20s where I'm like, okay, like I'm not tethered by this eating disorder. Not that it goes away for good. There's always those little things that you still kind of live with, but I wasn't like living and breathing by my eating disorder. But then now I was started experiencing this chronic back pain.
Oh.
And that's what I dealt with next. It was to the point where like tying my shoes was a battle. I didn't sleep at night. I couldn't find a comfortable position. I was driving an hour to work, so I'd have to get out multiple times on my commute just to get up and stand and reposition. Um, I couldn't do the things I love to do, which was athletics. Like I just couldn't do
Mhm.
that. And so I dealt with that for many years too. And I end up going to a practitioner. I am not one to go seek out medical help. It's just not what I do. Not saying it's not a good thing to do. It's just like I just am that. I'm just like that. But I did. I ended up going to somebody because I was just like I need to figure this out. And I went to a practitioner. They took an X-ray of my back, and they're like, "Well, your L4, L5 is half of the height it should be for a 25-year-old." And at that time, I wasn't really sure. Like I hadn't gone through PT school. I didn't really know what that really meant. And I'm like, well, does it get better? Like, am I going to get better? And they're like, well, it only progresses. Like you don't get your disc height back. And so I left that just feeling like, oh my gosh, I am 25. I have a whole life ahead of me. And if I only get worse, like what does that mean for my future? So I felt very, very like kind of hopeless in that moment. Um, and really like felt like that was my Achilles heel. Like I'm always going to have this point of weakness and that's my back. And
Mhm.
I kind of lived with that like messaging, like my back is weak, my back is weak. And that just perpetuated it.
Yeah.
Um, and then I know I'm going long here, but
No, you're great. You keep talking.
yeah. uh, but so that then continued and again hindered my life. There were times when my back would feel a little bit better, and there were times when it would just go back to that like huge flare up. And I really just was like, I'm not going down like this. So I just learned everything I possibly could. And I started seeing patterns in what I was experiencing. And really, every time I was stressed, it would flare up. Every time the stress kind of decreased in my life, it would go back down, but it never really went away. And then I kind of came to a realization like, this is like part of what I never really worked through with my eating disorder and learning the more and more and more about the nervous system and what I had gone through emotionally and seeing how it had kind of manifested physically. I'm like, this is making sense. And dove into research there, and there are a lot of there are studies that show that these are intertwined, that they are connected. And that's when it clicked. I'm like, this is not just something that I had that and then I had that. It's like they are together, and now I need to deal with it differently because I was dealing with it as a physical therapist, looking at it from an orthopedic standpoint, like what exercises can I do, what stretches can I do, how can I strengthen my body. And even from that standpoint, it wasn't working. So I knew I had to go through the nervous system. And from that point on, that was really like the key that opened up healing for me. And I don't have pain. I've had 2 children, like, I don't have pain now, and I mean, not to say I'm perfect, but I would say 99% of the time, I don't have back pain. So it's been beautiful from where I came from and to where I am.
It's amazing. I think of your story. I saw a little mirror of me in there.
You do? Yeah.
Just in the aspect of the exercising, I used to beat up my body
Mhm.
as opposed to, an act of just exercising it to be better, but just
Yeah.
utilizing it. If I just pushed it harder, if I just pounded it harder, if I ate
Mhm.
less,
Yep.
um, and so it's just so interesting to hear your story, your side
Mhm.
of things. And the other thing that I found intriguing is that, you're an athlete.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so one thing I want to bring up to the listeners is that we can look at somebody and just make all sorts of assumptions about them.
Mhm.
And so it must be so easy, look at her out running, like you said, wow, you got a lot of validation, a lot of compliment.
Mhm.
Um, and in the meantime, inside there, you were suffering, right?
Mhm.
Suffering
Absolutely.
on inside. And so it was similar with me. It was just I was coming from a feeling of lack, of
Mhm.
stress. You're saying all these things, the stress,
Mhm.
the shame,
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
guilt, you said, fearful. You finally came to a point when you were fearful for your life that you realized
Mhm.
something had to change, right?
Mhm.
So what, you talked about your the aspect of where you are today, but go down that road where you're talking about the emotional stress response on the body, and how having the eating disorder caused stress on your body, which then integrated in and then caused some physical
Mhm.
damage or physical problems. So I'd love to
Yeah.
hear that whole journey went for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the big thing with the stress as far as, like, the eating disorder is that there was a level of emotional distress that I was experiencing that I didn't realize at the time, the eating disorder, but I was just using the eating disorder to cope with it. So I through that, there was this perfectionist attitude that no matter what I did, I was never going to be enough. And I kind of lived and breathed that through my whole life. And I see even how I lived that when I was younger and was always trying to like meet this standard of people in my life and comparing myself to them and trying to be more like them because they're getting this praise or situations of just never feeling like no matter what I did, I never felt like it was going to be good enough. And I feel like that was kind of the overall theme that I lived with. So
Mhm.
that created a lot of turmoil within myself where I felt like I'm working so hard and it doesn't matter how hard I work because it doesn't matter. Like I just have to work harder. And this kind of isolation, like self isolation, like I isolated from people. So I was very lonely. So it just seemed to snowball even quicker because I was in my head so much. I didn't have that outlet. I was very secretive about it, so people weren't hearing this. So I did not have that like support that I probably needed at the time, but I just kind of shunned away. Um, Again, the shame of it that, here I didn't understand my emotions at that time, didn't recognize them, didn't even know. I just know I didn't feel good and I wasn't happy with myself and I um, felt a lot of just distress within my whole system. And then engage in this like secret life that I was living, it did create such a great amount of shame in my whole being because people are perceiving me to be an athlete and I kind of felt like a sham, like I'm this athlete, but what if they only knew what was going on? So that created a lot of stress where I felt very shameful of like I'm showing one side of me, but deep down I'm very different. So it was like I can't be my authentic self around people because I need to always hide this. So that all built up into my system And what happens now, I understand, I didn't understand at the time, but now I understand that when you have all this stress going on and everything you're experiencing on top of like outside stress, like I was going to school at the time, I had a lot of life changes, there's always stress going on, but then like we also have the internal turmoil that's going on that creates this stress response in your nervous system. So you have a sympathetic response that's part of your nervous system, and it's a part of the autonomic nervous system. So you have a sympathetic response, which ramps up. And when you don't have any release and you constantly are increasing those stress levels, you kind of get stuck in that like sympathetic response. So that's what happens when you're experiencing a lot of like inner turmoil and emotional distress. What a healthy nervous system should do is that you experience stress and then you go back down and you kind of have like this ebb and flow of stress. That's a healthy nervous system. A healthy nervous system, again, is not just having this wonderful life. You never experience stress. It's about being able to be flexible. So when you experience stress for long periods of time, you become less flexible. So you're already at this heightened level, and any little bit of extra stress keeps heightening you up, and you never get that release. And when
Mhm.
you finally do kind of hit your breaking point, you go into this like freeze. Like you feel like you have nothing left. So you're fighting, and then you get to a point where you have your breaking point and you're like, ah, and you just like you're just done. Like you have nothing left to give. You're kind of just in this state of I just am here. And then you build up enough tolerance and then you get right back into that sympathetic response. So you're never in this like window of tolerance where you have any ability to show up for life, embrace change, anything. You're always in like a protective mode. And so
Mhm.
that protection that we get into that mode, what happens is that we have a change in our nervous system. It's always on a heightened response. So part of why emotional distress creates chronic pain is that you get central sensitization. So your nervous system is actually more sensitized to any kind of stimuli that you're experiencing. So things that maybe are not painful to someone who hasn't experienced this are extremely painful for you, or your threshold is decreased. So that's part of it. Another part is the fascia. So our fascia is highly integrated in our nervous system. So when we're in a stress response for a long period of time, our fascia responds. So we get into a
Tell
tightened
tell
place.
them what fascia is.
Oh, yes. So fascia is connective tissue. So it's all throughout our body, and it
Mm.
covers, if you can Google fascia, but there's big bands of fascia all around our core. Every aspect of our body is essentially covered in fascia. And so when you are in a stress response, your fascia actually changes its properties. So it becomes more taut. It doesn't move as well, and you almost get into like more of like, if you could think of like fetal positioning, that's kind of the way the fascia will pull you. So you get into like, if you were protecting yourself, you get into that place, maybe not
Mhm.
that extreme, but that's how you get into. And
Okay.
so the body responds to all this stress on top of everything else that stress does to you. So I could talk
Right.
for days about, but like hormonal response, cortisol levels, inflammation, there's a lot why it creates pain in your body. But unless you have something to take care of the stress response and become more resilient to it and be flexible, you just continue down that path.
Mhm.
So I know
Mhm.
that's a lot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And no, it's good. I'm loving. I'm making notes so I can go back and ask some
Yeah.
questions. So one thing was interesting, and I know that I've had real big issues with perfectionism in the past. I knew the cat would come in. I don't know if you
Oh.
can hear him. He's talking, um, but a lot of that perfectionism and this need to be perfect, and
Mhm.
because I basically had the same situation and it
Mhm.
caused so much stress, and then you walk around feeling like I'm not even being an authentic person, and then
Mhm.
eventually, because you feel like, how do I maintain this? And I remember too when I was
Mhm.
exercising out of just pounding myself, and one day I couldn't do it anymore. I
Mhm.
just couldn't,
Yeah.
and I just and I was young too, and just didn't understand how things worked, and
Mhm.
so just
Yeah.
to let everyone know. So we all kind of, I think everyone does not has to, but everyone must have gone through something where we feel that way. It's talked about a ton, but
Mhm.
if we can release our perfectionism,
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
will help our sympathetic nervous system. Is that, am I hearing you right?
The
Like it'll,
perfectionism, I'm sorry, say
yeah,
that the last.
will that help, the nervous system by releasing this perfectionism mindset, that'll
Yeah,
help
I mean,
our,
yeah, transforming it to something where you don't feel like it's controlling your, like, where the perfection is not controlling you. Yeah, I mean,
yes,
absolutely, that's part of it, is not feeling like you
great.
always have to be perfect. Mhm.
Yeah, and then when you talked about more, the nervous system being more sensitized, like
Mhm.
meaning, you're meaning that it doesn't take as much to spike it further. It
Mhm.
doesn't. It's not as pliable. Is that?
Mhm.
Am I hearing you right there?
With the nerves? Yeah, so you're already at a heightened response. So you can imagine, like, to think about it back in, like, primitive times, if you saw a lion, you're going to have this, like, response where you need to, like, either fight it, run away from it, or just freeze. Like, those are the responses that you get from feeling like you need to protect yourself. And so the same
Right.
thing happens when we have modern day threats, which could be your job, it could be family situation, whatever it is, whatever stresses you, you get that same response because that's how our brain is wired. So again, when you have that over and over again, so you see the line, you see a line the next day, you see a line next day, now you're primed. Like your brain is like, that line's coming back today, it's coming back tomorrow, it's coming back the next day. Like you're ready to fight that lion because it always shows up. So your system's already primed for it. So it's the same
Yeah,
thing. Like when you have a constant stress response, you're primed for it. Your brain is wired to get ready to respond.
great.
Yeah.
And then what it doesn't know, like it, I guess that's the blessing of being human, but not the blessing of being human. It's like,
Mhm.
as animals, they will go into stress mode to save their lives, but then once that um, predator's gone, they go back and their body goes back to a regular calm and
Mhm.
and was it cohesive? Is that the right word? Maybe. But for us, we're able to imagine stress every day, maybe, and we can forecast stress when
Mhm.
maybe some of that doesn't even happen, or and our body doesn't know the difference. Like it's
Yeah, and part of that is think about like an animal. So if they're being threatened by something, you can think about like a dog or whatever. They usually can have like a shake off period. They walk, they move, like they're moving afterwards. So they have this big
right.
cortisol buildup to because of that stress response, and then they have a release. In some way, they're moving. For a lot of us, a lot of our stress comes through a screen or a phone, and we're sitting, and so we don't get a release, or we don't have a system to release it. So we store it.
Okay,
And then we don't have enough time in between stress to allow it to ever be released. And then it just builds up. So there is
gotcha.
the thing is that we are wired in a way that it is like our primitive brain because that hasn't evolved to meet the demands of what modern society has given us where we have constant stress and we have constant internal stress and external stress. So we're not able to handle that as well. And when we don't have a release for that or tools in place, then it just builds up. And then that's when it can manifest physically. Mhm.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. And I know sometimes when I catch myself that I'm breathing shallow
Mhm.
and I can feel a tightness like right in my chest, and I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, I'm stressed. I'm amped up, and then I'm like, well, why am
Mhm.
I amped up? What's going on?
Yeah.
And I do better now than I have in the past of
Mhm.
figuring out what it is, realizing I'm not really in danger. My life is not in
Mhm.
danger. But what you
Yeah.
said was I'd have to go run it off, physically
Mhm.
go run to burn that cortisol. It was like
Mhm.
I gotta
Yeah. And that was part of like what now I realize I was doing was like I was running, but there's coping mechanisms and then there's unhealthy coping mechanisms and healthy coping mechanisms. And for me, like the running was the release, but it was just numbing myself from the stress rather than dealing with it.
wow.
And that's the big thing. It's
Yeah.
not a sheer amount of like what you're doing afterwards. It's like what's the purpose behind it? And then for me, that was a numbing activity. So for some people, especially if you've exercised excessively, it can become a numbing activity, even though you think you're helping yourself. it's actually perpetuating that, because running again can be is a sympathetic response. You're ramping your system up. So unless you're using your body in a way that's actually serving you to take care of this, you could actually be snowballing the effect of it.
Thanks for bringing that to. That was
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Hmm.
Yeah. Wow. So gosh, you talked about the fascia and those physical responses to that. I'm all ears for the next tidbit that you may have where you want to
Yeah.
go with this.
Yeah, sure. So the big thing is that we get a system in place. So I'm not about decreasing stress, because realistically, we can't decrease stress in our life. And there's always going to be stress. Like if we come at it with the approach that our stress levels around us are going to decrease, then we're just setting ourselves up for failure. So the only thing we can do is create an internal environment where we can buffer stress better. And that's the big thing. That's really what I advocate for, is that we're not controlling anything in your external environment, even though there are things we can kind of set boundaries with, so we're not constantly getting bombarded with stress, but having a realistic expectation that stress is just part of life. It's what we have to experience, but we need to be able to figure out how we can maintain our internal balance so that it doesn't affect us as much. And I kind of use the analogy of like a refrigerator. So you set your refrigerator at like 40 degrees. If it's 90 degrees outside or 0 degrees outside, your refrigerator is going to maintain 40 degrees. So
Mm-hmm.
you too should, with the tools, you should be able to kind of get back to that set point. Not to say that you don't get up to that 90, but if you can get back to that set point of 40 quicker, that's the key. Same thing. Not to say you're not going to get to that 0, but if you can get back to that 40 quicker, that's the key. So what happens when we don't have tools in place is that we get set off to our 90 and we kind of stay there, and we don't know how to get back to 40. And that's the thing. So my big thing is, let's figure out what you can do and implement in your life and create a lifestyle where if you have things that are throwing you off, you're able to get yourself back quicker than you ever have been able to. So you're not snowballing the impact of it.
Right. And there's something about that too, where you just feel like you have no hope, there's no hope.
Hmm.
And um and that the world's just happening around you, and it feels, I guess you feel like you're a trapped lion, or you're trapped in a corner, and then
Hmm.
something small happens, something trivial happens, and you blow
Hmm.
your stack, and
Hmm.
everyone's like, what is with her? Why is she crying
Yeah.
over some French fries,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
and then you feel stupid, and you know what I mean, because you're so amped already.
And then it
So what
compounds it, because now you're shameful of your behavior, and now it just makes the
I know,
situation worse. Hmm.
and then
Yeah.
I like the analogy. I've got my spiked whip, and I'll just beat myself up even more, because that I
Hmm.
should, right?
Yeah.
And it just makes you feel worse. And
Hmm.
so with that, what tools do you advise people to have in their toolbox for,
Hmm.
we can't control what other people do. We can't
Hmm.
control the news. We can't control anything outside those parameters. We can't.
Mhm,
So what I heard you say, but we can control our reaction, and we can control our internal thermostat,
mhm,
and and create a harmonious world where, if we are stressed, because we are going to have things happen, but we
mhm,
can, if I heard you right, we can reset. Okay, we go through the stress, but then we can bring our body back into a
mhm.
healthy state. So I'm all ears. I can't wait to hear what you
Yeah,
say.
yeah. So a big thing that I do, at least with my program, is I put people through an audit. So let's audit what your perceptions and your mindsets are on things around stress, around energy levels, around sleep, around pain, all that. So it's more about like, what are your perceptions of where you are right now and what you're doing to help yourself? What do you think is hurting yourself? And so I take a good look of like, are you right now, and then a big thing before you even get there is like, where do you want to be? So what is your dream outcome? And then
Mhm.
through that, understanding where you are now allows you to again, a lot of people, and I experience this myself too. It's like a lot of times we're not even aware of what our perceptions are or mindset is until we're kind of forced to face it. So it really gives you a good idea of like, where am I coming at things from? So your point of view in all these relationships, as far as like your thinking is, are you able to, do you even think you're capable of healing? That's, I mean, that's a big one. Do you think you're worthy of healing? That's another big one, because a lot of people I've worked with, one, are skeptical that they can even heal. They usually think everyone else can heal, but they can't heal. Or so a lot of times they don't even think they're worthy of healing, that they're worth it. And again, that's a big thing too, just to kind of understand. So those are really the big things to even get to a place where you are in a place to be receptive. Because the thing about tools, you could throw, I mean, anyone can Google things and whatnot. There's a plenty of information out there, but until you're ready to receive it, it does no good. So we have to get into a place where you're understanding where you can change, if you feel like you can change, that you want to change. Is there a strong enough why behind it? And then now we can start implementing that roadmap to getting you to your dream outcome. So the big thing is just getting the mind in the right place to even be receptive. Because if you're not receptive and you don't believe it's possible, it's not. And there's nothing anyone can do to really help that until that is in a better place. But as far as
Yeah.
tools, big thing I always start with is breath work, because that is a in between the sympathetic, so your stress response, and your parasympathetic nervous system. So the only thing that we can control, so the autonomic nervous system is kind of what always used to think, people think is automatic, like it's just in the background, you don't think about it, you have no control over it. And in many cases that is true, but one place you do have control over that is breath. So breath is the only thing that is sympathetic, that is voluntary and automatic. So it's the only thing that you
So
don't control, but you can
that,
control. Oh, I'm sorry, it cut
so
out.
explain the autonomic. Oh no, you're good. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Hello.
Yep. Yeah, I can hear
Explain
you.
the yeah, explain the different nervous systems, and because we're saying autonomic, sympathetic, and
Yep.
the other one. Uh,
Yeah.
can you
So
explain what
you
each one
have
does?
a, yeah. Yep. So you have the autonomic nervous system, which is then has two branches. So the autonomic nervous system is kind of the umbrella term. And then you have a sympathetic branch, which is your stress response. So that's your fight, flight, or freeze. So that's, you have a really bad situation. That's when you just want to like fight it, run away, or you just like kind of become paralyzed from it. And then you have the parasympathetic branch, which is your rest, digest, restore. So that's the branch where you're like, everything's okay. You can kind of let your guard down. That's when your digestive system can work because you don't have to fight anything. That's when reproduction can occur because you don't have to fight anything. That's when all your systems can kind of work harmoniously. So
Right.
ideally, that's the system we want to be in most of the time. But
And then the autonomic is the one that regulates our heartbeat, our autonomic is everything we don't control. So right. So
yeah,
that's
so autonomic is your umbrella term with the two branches off of it. But yeah, your autonomic nervous system controls your heart rate, your breath, your digestive system, reproduction, hormones.
right.
It really, everything that we don't have to think about to survive. So
Right.
it
I
has a
just want to
lot
break
of,
it pieces so that
yeah,
we. Yeah.
absolutely.
Great. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry. So breath work. We were talking about breath work.
Yeah, so breath is going to be one of those things that is voluntary, but also automatic. We don't have to think about it. So it's a great pathway to be able to access the autonomic nervous system, where we can transition somebody from sympathetic response, that stress response, to a more parasympathetic response. So that's why breath is a really great gateway to open up the nervous system to be even receptive to anything other than a stress response. So again,
Okay.
breath, when you're just having a stress response, usually you breathe more shallow, you are taking very quick breaths. So when we talk about breath work, it has to be conscious breath work where you're consciously aware of it and you're doing it intentionally with extending the exhale. So that's really the big thing as far as getting the parasympathetic nervous system to turn on more. So that's that rest, digest, restore. But that's a big one. And I could probably talk about each of these sections for hours. But again, breath
No,
is really one of those first pathways that you want to open up the system to even be receptive. So, and there's so many tools around breath work that you can do and implement. And the amazing thing about breath work is that you can do it anywhere, any time. It really is just a tool that's with you at all points. So that is just
mhm,
a great way to start. And then I also implement a lot of vagus nerve techniques. So our vagus
oh,
nerve is our longest nerve. It's a cranial nerve and it connects our brain to basically all those systems I just talked about, the digestive system, the heart, the lungs. It connects all those systems. So
mhm,
when we have really high vagal tone, we are more resilient to things. We can buffer things better. When we have really low vagal tone, we can't. And so that's when we have those responses where we just feel like the stress is overtaking us. We're overwhelmed. We can't handle anymore. So the vagus nerve is really important to address too, because that's our connector between our brain. And the really big thing is it's our connector between our brain and our gut. So when you're feeling stressed, you can a
mhm,
lot of times feel like your stomach is in knots. There's actually a connection
mhm.
there. When you were forming, your brain and your gut were directly connected and they still are through the vagus nerve. So that's why a lot of like gut health issues come up when we have like a stress response for a long period of time. Um,
Right, because
and you're
isn't it that like when we're stressed, that's not a time to relax. That's not a time to digest. It's not a time
Mhm,
to be eating, and it's not time to be learning, right? Because the
mhm,
body's amped. It's time to run. It's time to hide.
mhm.
It's time to do those things. So so how I'm hearing you is then that affects that vagus nerve, which then affects digestion. So you're not going to be, it's going to mess up that whole area. Like I've heard people when they're really stressed, they will lose their bowels, they get diarrhea,
Mhm.
and it just goes. So that's something to think about, everyone. When you are stressed, your body's like, no, it's not time. I'm not prepared. I don't have the ability to do those things with you right now.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
part of it, and also to the vagus nerve, it connects top down, but also connects bottom up. So anything that's going on in the gut also sends signals to the brain. So a big thing is that our guts actually produce half of the dopamine in our brains. So when we talk
Right.
about dopamine, that is motivation, it's drive, it has a big part in pleasure. So
Mhm.
when we talk about that too, and especially when we talk about eating disorders, when we have a lot of gut disruption, how now the brain again is impacted by that. So it can become
Right.
a big vicious cycle when we have a stress response and then our gut is being compromised and it just continues. So
So
working through the
for you,
vagus nerve and
yeah. Sorry. Go ahead. Go
oh
ahead.
no, that's okay.
So for you, then, when you were having your you're in the midst of your eating disorder, where you were starving yourself and then causing yourself to be really really athletic, and then you would binge,
Mhm.
and then you went to the point where you did vomiting, and in regards to those things, um, so your vagus nerve was all the hormones or the signals coming back and forth were just so disruptive by that, and it would just compound is what you're saying, right? It just keeps
Oh,
compounding the more you do.
yeah, it's not necessarily just it's not like the hormones are sending signals, it's actually an electrical signal that goes back and
Thank you.
forth because
Sorry.
yeah, yep,
Electrical.
but it does impact the hormones. Yeah, but it does
Right.
impact the hormones as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
so again, if you have a stress response, that can impact how the gut is functioning. So if you're constantly stressed, digestion is not a priority because
Right.
you are in protection mode. So that's not a priority. So your digestive tract doesn't work as well as it should. And then, same thing, if especially with eating disorders, particularly when you are doing things like I was, which was like restricting,
Right.
purging, binging. I mean, a lot of things that were disrupting the gut health. Now that's impacting what's happening. So that sends signals again back up to the brain, but also interferes with dopamine production. So
Yep.
it's a lot of different things that go on with that, but all not in a good direction.
Right.
So
Okay. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So the vagus nerve is very important.
Yeah. Another way that I help to regulate the nervous system is through the visual system. So our eyes are actually an extension of our brain. So that's a really
Mhm.
great way to allow the system to relax, to transition from that stress response to that rest, digest, restore response. So I teach a lot of techniques of how we can really use the visual system to transition the nervous system. So again, our eyes have a reciprocal relationship to what's going on in our brains. So when we have a stress response, our eyes tend to dilate and narrow the vision. And when we have a relaxation response, it's the opposite. They narrow in the pupils, but they have a more broadened vision. So using those principles, that's how we can work the visual system into allowing the nervous system to also transition. So it's a really another great gateway to make those transitions. And again, just something else you can do that doesn't require fancy equipment. It's literally within you at all times. So that's
Well,
another
really,
one.
I love that. I love that because I know with a lot of breath work, it involves closing your eyes and taking away the environment. But it sounds
Mhm.
like to me, you help your clients be able to be in the environment visually and learn to bring that sympathetic nervous system back down, which is great because in a meeting or a meeting with
Mhm.
your boss or job interview, it's not like you can just sit down and close your eyes. Say, just give me about 30 minutes. I gotta.
Yeah.
So you're meaning
Yeah.
that you're able to teach someone with eyes open in an environment to bring down
Mhm.
that stress response.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean,
Right.
I think that's the big thing is that we all have to be able to function in what we have. Like we can't quit our jobs and just sit here and, do breath work for hours on end. It's really about being able to do that when you have it available, but also then carry into a stressful environment. So, of course, when you're learning this, it's not ideal to be in a stressful environment because you're not going to be able to do that in a manner that really serves you. But as you get better in times where you do feel receptive and you are able to do it, you eventually do want to integrate it into a stressful environment because that's really when you can see that you are regulating in a way that you need to. So again, it's all individualized. So when someone is working with me, it's not like a one size fits all. It's like let me meet you where you are and help you get you to the next step. So that's the big thing. It's not about like you need to do this now. It's about easing into it in a place where it doesn't become a stress response. Like if I were to say to you like go in your most stressful situation and you need to do this, your nervous system's just going to fire up. It's going to backfire. So you can't tell somebody to do anything that's completely out of their comfort zone. It's figuring out where's their comfort zone and going just a little bit further and then a little bit further and then eventually easing into a place where now they're doing it in a stress response.
Right. But then the initial stress response is, I don't need one more thing added to my plate in stress,
Mhm.
right? And the
Mhm.
mind is going to shut down, like you were saying earlier, when we're in stress, we're not in a position where we want to learn. We want to bring on
Yeah.
anything else on our plate, even if it's going to be helpful. So I love
Mhm.
how you brought that up. And I love also the aspect that you're looking at each person individually because, you know,
Mhm.
I, we don't fit in boxes. We aren't, none of us are the same. We have,
Mhm.
we are human beings. That's really about
Mhm.
it. And
Yeah.
have some of the same physical features and stuff. But our
Mhm.
lives, even though we have a house or a pet or a job, but there's all those little detail increase in trick. Oh my gosh. What am I trying to say? The
Intricacies.
details, the tiny.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was what I
Yep.
wanted. make us different.
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
can
so the
kind of
fact
share a
that
story of something. Oh, I'm sorry. I was gonna say I can kind of share a story of something that happened to me yesterday that I actually made a story about this because I was like, oh my gosh, like I've come a long way because so yesterday, I was like fine in the morning and then all of a sudden I just got so sick. Like I was vomiting multiple times yesterday. It was awful. Like just so sick. I don't know if I had like a 24-hour bug or something. So that happened. So then my husband's like, "Well, I'll come home early because like we had the two kids." And so he came home and then we had no water. We're like, "Oh my gosh, what like why don't we have water?" So we're like something's wrong with our pump. It must be wrong with our well pump. So we had no water last night. And then we're like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be thousands of dollars, like because that's expensive. Our pump is like 400 feet in the ground. So we're like freaking out about that. And our house is only 3 years old. So it's like, why is this breaking already? So it was just
right,
like so many things that were going on last night. And you know what? Like I was like in a good place, it's like it didn't put me over the edge, like we have two little kids, we have no water like right now. And, I feel sick and like it
awful.
was like yeah, it was like the perfect storm. And I'm like, wow, I'm like amazingly calm, for what's going on. And I know if that was me a few years ago, that would not be my reaction. I would have like lost it, and then I would have like, this is gonna happen, this is gonna happen. So I literally do the work every day and it is a regiment that I do every day, but it's not overwhelming me every day. It's something I actually enjoy and I bookend my days. I do some stuff in the morning, I do some stuff at night and that's it. And it just made me realize that like what I'm doing is working, So
Right,
that's just kind of like a
right.
personal story that I recognize that, these things do work and it doesn't take hours to do it. It's just these little things you have to change just a little bit each day and it really does make a difference.
It does. And you talked about neuroplasticity. So
Mhm.
tell us about that. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so neuroplasticity is your ability for your brain to rewire. So it's something that happens throughout our life. Um, from you, the best example is you can see like babies when they learn, that's neuroplasticity happening. I mean, you can literally see it happening because it happens very fast in babies and in children, but it's something that happens in us as adults as well. So everything we're exposed to, everything we do rewires our brain. So you can watch the news for days on end and listen to a lot of negativity. Literally, your brain will rewire to be a little bit more fearful after that. You
Mhm.
can do uh, things that are more serving to you, and then your brain will rewire. So, no matter what you do, your brain is rewiring. So, what happens when you
Mhm.
have chronic pain is that you have things that have wired your brain for many, many years. So you have very, very deep neural pathways. So that's why it's tough. It's tough when you have chronic pain because these are so deep that it's not like you do this and you're better in a week. It takes a while to get those neural pathways to rewire. But the beauty about neuroplasticity is that it is available to you your whole life. So that's why it
Mhm.
is possible to heal from things. But again, it may just take longer because you could think about it as like a field. If you have really tall grass and you always walk that same path, what happens? It makes a clearing. You push all that grass to
Mhm.
the side. And that's what happens. Those are neural pathways. If you maybe deviate once down another path, it's just a slight path, but it's not going to be as deep as the one you've been going down all the time. So you always are able to create this. It's like the repetition. So you need
Mhm.
that repetition to create stronger pathways. So if your
Mhm.
repetition involves listening to the news, doing things that numb you out, spending all your time on social media, talking negatively, being around negative people, you're only going to strengthen those neural pathways. So you're
Yeah.
never going to allow yourself to change.
Right. Right. Exactly. And
Mhm.
that's what I like. What I just love is what we're learning more in science today about how the brain really does work, and in the
Mhm.
theory, once it was set, you were there was nothing you could do to change it. There was nothing
Mhm.
that you can even reroute around a brain injury. And we know today
Mhm.
now that it is very, very capable of rerouting, creating
Mhm.
you can create a whole new like personality or uh, concept of yourself by what
Mhm.
you teach your brain, and it's
Mhm.
really exciting. And so what I find, um, it definitely way above my pay grade is how you do this to to work with pain, because so
Mhm.
I had a 2005 snowmobiling accident, and
Mhm.
the healing process didn't go well. So my knee always hurt, and I couldn't do anything. Then I had to have surgery on it about 8 months later, and
Mhm.
then it got put back together. And then, but and I finally found a young doctor who would help me, because I
Mhm.
knew I shouldn't be still in this kind of pain, and I shouldn't have that unable to just walk upstairs normal or get downstairs normal. And my brain
Mhm.
was so wired. It was
Mhm.
so afraid. It was honed
Mhm.
right in on my knee and my hip flexor.
Mhm.
And he worked with me. And I realize now he worked with me in neural pathways and got
Mhm.
me through the fear, got me to trust. It still kind of
Mhm.
bugs me every now and then, but I'm doing amazing things now. When I couldn't
Mhm.
even jump off two weight plates, literally two weight
Yeah.
plates, I was crying because my
Mhm.
pathway was so strong. So
Yep. Yeah.
interesting. That's exciting. I'm loving what you're doing for people,
Oh,
and
thank
that
you.
you're helping them. Not, and the fact that the eating disorder
Mhm.
and then also this pain concept is incredible. I
Mhm.
mean,
Oh, thank you
you know,
so much.
yeah.
Yeah, and that's the big thing. It's all comes down to safety. So when we talk about pain, there's a compromise in safety. So for you, there you were not feeling safe to do some of those motions, and then the more you feel like you're not safe, the more you avoid it, and then the more you continue that cycle of like, okay, I don't feel safe, I avoided it. Oh, I was safe because I avoided it. Okay, keep avoiding it, and then that's what your brain learns. So if we can cut that cycle of like I don't feel safe. Let me try something different. Oh, wow, I was safe.
Mhm.
Okay, let me try something different again. And it sounds very simple, but that literally is how the brain works because its only goal is to keep you safe. So when we experience pain, that is because your brain's trying to keep you safe. Even though you may feel like it's your enemy, it's actually doing its job to protect you, but it's just the way it's coming out. It's not pleasant,
Mhm.
but again, it's protecting you because there's something in you that doesn't feel safe. And that's why you can see a lot of people who have like trauma, any kind of like history of trauma, or where they didn't feel safe at some point in their life. Safety is really where it comes down to. And it can even just feel like you're not safe to express yourself. So it may not be something that's explicitly like traumatic, but maybe you don't feel safe to be your authentic self. And then now that becomes your story, you don't feel safe, and then now we start seeing that coming out as pain. So that's really the big thing, is like teaching you how can you feel safe, and how can you feel safe in your body, and teach your brain that it does not need to protect you. And that's really where it comes down to.
Wow. Wow.
Mhm.
Incredible. So how I will put your website
Mhm.
in the comments below.
Sure. Mhm.
But again, uh, everyone, what I love and I'm hearing, and as an integrative nutrition health coach, uh, you're working with someone where they're at, who's ready, and
Mhm.
you're looking at their whole life, and then
Mhm.
and you talked about it as for me it's like an assessment, but you had a different word about it with you, where you
Yes, an audit.
review
Yeah. An
and all.
audit. There's an auditing. Mhm.
And so let me tell everyone, sometimes that can be scary.
Mhm.
Your brain might say,
Yeah.
I'm afraid to work with someone because I have shame. I'm afraid to tell this person, really what's going on. And plus I'm afraid to even see it myself. But
Mhm.
I promise you, and I know, Dr. Kelly will say the same. Once we can see it, then we can grow
Mhm.
and come from it, right? And
Mhm. Yeah,
yeah,
the big thing is bringing awareness to it. Once you bring
yeah,
awareness to something, it stops growing. So anything that's holding you down, if you bring awareness to it and just sit in it for a minute, then it doesn't have as much control over your life. And it's I'm not downplaying how scary that is. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
still learning things about myself. So it's not like you ever kind of reach that pinnacle of like, I'm good and everything's great. I healed myself. It's never that, but you have to at least start the process and get yourself to a place where now you see that there's been change, because that becomes the catalyst for more change. So
Mhm.
action actually increases motivation. So if you take action first, you actually become more motivated to be like, okay, let me try something new.
Yeah.
But a lot of times our comfort zones are known things that we're familiar with, that we know. And that's just another way that our brain protects us, because it's efficient, it knows it, and why change it if it's been safe? So
Yeah.
it is just making that first step to just get out of that comfort zone just a little bit, not to the point where you feel like you're being threatened, but to the point where you feel like, okay, I can grow from this. How do I start? And then how do I take this and just baby step it? And really, the big thing is about taking
Yeah.
small steps, but compounding those steps over a long period of time.
I love it. I love it. And I just want to bring up to you because something um, it's hard to change because you're in your comfort area, and
Mhm.
your comfort area can actually, like you said earlier, with your eating disorder, or you
Mhm.
were in comfort with it. And
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
interesting. So
Yeah.
if people listening to this or watching can say, oh, and just maybe at a different consciousness level, be able
Mhm.
to look at what's going on, and then say, oh my gosh, well, Dr. Kelly can change, and she can be living a vibrant life,
Mhm.
and maybe I can too, and just
Mhm.
take that initial step. And
Yeah.
you got I got chills because it's like
Yeah.
just have a little ounce, just an ounce of courage to step out and say,
Mhm.
gosh, I don't have to be trapped in this. I don't have to
Mhm.
live like this. And we aren't meant to be living, trapped like that.
Mhm.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Exactly,
yeah,
and when I was in the thick of it, there were many times that I felt like this was I can't believe like that I feel the way I do today, and I'm not tethered by it. So like when you're in it, it's hard to see what's possible, Like when you asked me 20 years ago, I'd be like, "There's no way I will ever be like that." So it really is. You can
yes,
astound yourself in what you're able to accomplish. So the big thing is like you may have doubts now, but just trust that like you said, you're not meant to live like this.
yeah. And
Yeah.
I know for me, and you may feel the same too, when you look back on who you were, and I look back on Tracy, who became pre-diabetic, who felt low and a
Mhm,
loser, and
mhm,
how could she have let this happen? And but I love her, and I'm so grateful for her because I did learn a lot from her, but also that
mhm,
she knew something in her mind said, it was a small little voice, but it said, maybe, just maybe, we can figure this out.
mhm,
And so Tracy today is just so grateful for her. And
mhm.
one, Kelly, you probably feel the same. Just,
Totally.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it literally I never would imagine that that would become, like, my biggest strength, and it's just
yeah,
that's where it's like it has been a big healing process for me, even
yeah.
continued, because I really did not open up about my eating disorder until like only a few years ago. So this is
Yeah.
still like a healing thing.
Oh,
Like I kept it secret for a very long time. So, but I feel like I have a responsibility to be open about it, because if it helps somebody feel like
yeah,
that they can get through it, then that's worth it. But I
yeah.
wish that more people were open when I went through it, so I didn't feel alone. So I feel like I have that responsibility to be open about what I went through. So if it helps one person, it was worth it.
Awesome. Exactly.
Mhm.
So do you have another tidbit for us before we go, or anything you'd like to tell us about your practice or your podcast? Oh my gosh, that's right. You have a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. So I have a podcast. It's called Rewiring Health. It's on Apple, Spotify, and Anchor. And really I have some that I just do by myself, but some with some amazing guests. and it kind of covers a slew of topics. I've had I had Tracy on it like a few weeks ago, so Tracy's on there. I had someone with talking about gut health. Someone talk about histamines and chronic pain. So that was a really interesting episode. Pelvic floor, uh, emotions, so how we can work through our emotions. So I've had just some amazing guests, like, and so many people who have had inspiring stories about their own recovery with eating
Are you
disorders.
there?
Oh yeah, I'm here. Yep. So it's been fascinating. So yeah, so if you are going through an eating disorder or have chronic pain or just feel like you want to understand how you can better yourself through the nervous system and your body, looking at your whole body and your whole life, then it definitely listen to the episodes. There's so many amazing people, and I have a bunch that I'm going to be posting coming up here too.
That's so exciting. I love it. Oh my gosh.
Thanks.
Well, Dr. Kelly, thank you so much
Yes,
for
thank you so
being
much.
on the broadcast, and I really appreciate it. And yeah, anyone, if you know of anyone or you have any questions for Dr. Kelly, reach out
Mhm.
to her, follow her podcast, and everyone have a wonderful night.
Yes, good night. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, night everybody, and Dr. Kelly, stay on. Okay.
Sure.
Everyone.